All right. Thank you, Matt, and thank you, OPCDE, for the opportunity to come speak today. My name is Philip Misner. I'm a security group manager with the Microsoft Security Response Center. I've spent about 11 and a half years over the past working on security response. In that, I've done a lot of crisis management with Microsoft, everything from Conficker to Stuxnet to the DigiNotar certificate authority breach, and then WannaCry last spring. Did a lot of crisis management. Now I'm looking more around the ecosystem strategy. Today, what I wanted to do is talk to you about a part of the business we don't spend a lot of time talking about. Normally, we get up and we talk about vulnerabilities or malware samples, but I want to talk about the actual business and how, as a community, we come together to actually address security vulnerabilities and what we want to get out of there. I want to start looking at what sort of has changed in the ecosystem over the last year, then go look at sort of the highs and the lows from that, and then pivot into what we are doing at Microsoft to engage and change differently for the ecosystem in the coming year, as well as what we can do as a community there. So at a high level, we'll start with 2017 in review. For those of you who are still recovering from last spring, it started something like this. There's a little group called Shadow Brokers and WikiLeaks, and they came out and they did a ton of mass disclosures of cyber weapons there, which later became two of our favorite pieces of malware, WannaCry and Petya there. That took up most of half a year last year. By the fall, we went in and we were starting to look at vulnerabilities and foundational specifications like WPA. Maddie's up after this to talk about that. If I can borrow a couple of weeks there out of 2018 to show some more of what's evolving, we got just 3 days into 2018 and out came Meltdown and Spectre. Closely following that on the chipset front was the AMDflaws.com, where an Israeli research company came in and was talking about a whole nother set of hardware-related vulnerabilities. These all changed up how the normal flow of vulnerability disclosure and what industry was doing with security researchers to address these. But let's talk about coordinated vulnerability disclosure. This is nothing that's particularly new. Over the last 20 years, we as a community have gone back and forth over what's the best way to coordinate and fix vulnerabilities. In fact, June 1st of this year is going to be the 20th anniversary of Microsoft's first security bulletin that we put out. It's been a long time and a long conversation that's going through. Here I've got a chart showing you remote code execution and elevation of privilege vulnerabilities over the year just for the Microsoft products. As our portfolio has increased, you can see the line of critical vulnerabilities has also increased there. Yesterday, during Daniel's keynote, he showed you a trend for all CVEs over industry that had an even steeper curve that was going up. As security researchers and as industry, we're getting better at finding these. It's not necessarily new risk, but we're getting better at being able to find them quickly and address them. So, one of the ways that we can go through and take a look at this is really how much security has changed in our minds there. It is not just security practitioners that are interested in security now. It's all the way up into the boardrooms at industries. Well, some of that attention is probably from things like big data breaches and CEO accountability for some of those breaches. But certainly, it's no longer just the security folks in the IT department that are going through and being interested about how security impacts the ecosystem and the companies there. It's a major point of topic there. One of the other ways that you can go and measure how much security has changed over the past few years is look at the number of security conferences that are popping up. In my current role at Microsoft, I look a lot about what's being presented out in the community. And it seems like almost every week I'm hearing about another security conference that is popping up. The demand for security is absolutely great, and that is only going to increase over the coming years. So, let's talk about our technology and how it's sort of wound into our lives. It has become a big central part of how we go through and live. think about all of the devices that you use in your offices. Now think about how many of you have them sitting at your home, or your parents' home, or even the ones that you have on you right now. Technology is everywhere. Some of it's very updatable and flowing. Some of it is static and doesn't get a lot of looked at. What is one of the common themes here is as you get this proliferation of devices, we haven't spent a lot of time as a research community going and looking at this as an aggregate. We'll go and we'll look at one thing in particular, but not of them as a whole. And that is going to cause more issues. Go back a couple of years and you look at the Dyn DNS attacks that went on. That was just a large botnet of webcams that were going after and causing real damage to the internet. This proliferation of devices and how it's showing up is going to drive how we need to consider coordinating for vulnerabilities there. We sort of joke about the idea of a connected toaster going through there. The idea that you could get social media or check your email while you're getting your toast in the morning. But these are real things, like they're actually products that people are delivering there. And they bring all sorts of opportunities. Sometimes it's for metrics, like you see the biometrics looking about steps that you're doing and your heart rate and those items. Sometimes it's alarm systems, and others it's video conferencing to bring us all closer together there. What is common is that these can go through either to be connected to the networks or to the internet in a way that can bring us great opportunity, or they bring us peril along with them. Today, how people really have been approaching security is what I call a transactional approach to security. We think of everything as vulnerabilities are still a rare occurrence. But if you go back to those charts that we saw yesterday and today, the number of vulnerabilities that are showing up aren't rare occurrences. We're getting better at finding them quicker and being more transparent about it, but they aren't rare occurrences. They shouldn't be treated just as a bug at a time, but that's the way we often go about thinking about these. And often it's just applying a Band-Aid, a quick fix to it. As engineers, we are exceedingly good at going through and simplifying problems as they're coming out. We often take complex problems, boil them down into very simple statements, and make it the shortest path between 2 points in order to go address these. And that transactional approach isn't something that's going to scale in the new ecosystem that we're seeing out there. So, was 2017 an anomaly? Was this just a fluke? It's probably not. This is the new reality that as a community we're going to have to go deal with. We're going through and looking at common threads about how interconnected we are, both from a sort of source and device perspective, as well as the need to re-examine how we go through and do disclosure. Now, make no qualms about this. I'm not calling on a question as whether or not coordinating vulnerability disclosure is important. What I'm talking about here is how do we go and do this and share over a wider space. Some of the challenges that we go through and see here, first, a lot of that change in 2017 was about multi-party vulnerability disclosure. It's no longer one-to-one conversation with security researchers to a single company. It's often multiple companies that are going to be involved in this. And when you look at the proliferation of open source into all sorts of products, that is going to even get bigger as we have to go and try to tackle that problem. We have mixed operating environments, shared source, or foundational specifications. The crack attacks were all about something that was implemented not only in hardware but in software and across a broad spectrum of organizations, both open source and proprietary. You look along supply chains. Supply chains, Talos was here talking about those yesterday and some of the challenges that are seeing with those. Government protectionism, the instinct of governments to start moving security research as a differentiator and a way to weaponize or keep that internal within a company or in a single country. And then, of course, there's new security or new players that are coming into this that don't have an idea of how to actually go through and do security response. They don't know where to start. They're coming in, they know security is important, they've got boards telling them, they've got stock markets, they've got security researchers in the community, but they don't know where to start. This list for practitioners shouldn't be anything that's new. Many of these are on the top worries lists for large amounts of industry and community members here. So the question is, where do we start? How do you start in this conversation about engaging in this ecosystem and being successful for the challenges that are going to come and continue to challenge how we operate and how we think about vulnerabilities? And for me, this always boils back down to, what is the goal? Is there a common goal between the security research community, industry, and open source? I think there is. I think the common goal here is we all are interested in moving security in a positive direction for the ecosystem and the end users there. And for that, we've got to go back to the idea that how we move security matters. And that end state of the end users and getting that security is an important space. So with that in mind, with a common goal that we're looking to all move that to, let's look at the highs and lows of 2017, what worked, what didn't, and then see where we're going to go from there. Like I mentioned before, our year started with shadow brokers and WikiLeaks. This was a case of cyber weapons being disclosed. What happens when a nation state loses control of a cyber weapon and it gets disclosed out onto the world? Well, hold on, that wasn't exactly what happened to us last year, right? The problem that we saw last year was it wasn't a cyber weapon that got exposed, it was a whole bunch of cyber weapons. Well, what's the playbook for that? We have, as an industry, we haven't run into that before. Sure, there's been hacking, there was the hacking team before it where we had vulnerabilities that came through and were exposed. But this was something of a totally different nature when you go back and you look at shadow brokers. This was mass disclosure of cyber weapons. And what's made it even more difficult was they came with a how-to manual. So all of a sudden, you had people who could plug and play and be a nation state actor. They had the exploits, they had the tools, and now they had the how-to to actually go in and run that. And that we saw transform 30 days and 60 days later into what was WannaCry and Petya in that space. Just look at the sheer number and volume that we were dealing with. 8,700 different documents, tools, and actual exploits that came through there. That's a lot for even machines to go through and process and understand what's going on. At Microsoft, from the day disclosure happened from shadow brokers, we counted it in 14 hours. It took us 14 hours and a whole lot of people to go through and take a look at what was dropped there and to provide a map of exploit to actual updates that were needed to address those. But despite all that quick work that went on, that didn't stop two worms. WannaCry and Petya still came and hit us over the head. You go, security researchers spent a lot of time poring over that same information that we're looking at. Some of it was done very quickly, and some of it was very, very wrong in those early hours that were coming out. But there were other research that came through in the community that gave us a good insight to what was going on with these nation state actors and how they were using vulnerabilities to go and attack real people. Yet, all of that research still didn't prevent the worms. We still got hit by those two sets. And then when you get to the enterprises going and trying to deal with this, asset management came back to bite us again. We still don't know what's running what or how quickly we are actually going through to update items in our environments. I'd like to tell you this is a new problem, but it isn't. Let's roll back the clock to 2009 and Configure B. This was the same problem we had there. You have a worm, it runs rapidly, spreads quickly through your environment, and back then we were still talking about, hey, we need to go through and understand asset management and how better to go and isolate our environments. And people said they were going to go start off and build to do that. It's 2018, and well, that was 2017. We're still not there for that. We haven't learned and been able to take that information that we had almost a decade ago and be able to build. Those items didn't prevent the worms that were coming in there. So let's take a stroll away from the nation state side of the world. This is an interesting issue that popped up later in the fall. Infineon is a TPM, or Trusted Platform Module provider there. They're one of the major providers there. A security researcher found a fundamental vulnerability that was sitting in these TPM chips. When they say encryption, normally when you're looking for these trusted platform modules, you're thinking strong encryption is what you want. Well, encryption's hard, math was hard, and it wasn't quite as strong as what was advertised out there. This was an example of multi-party vulnerability disclosure going through in a chipset. In our press to go through and make identities harder to steal, software is tied deeply into hardware and has, by that, also bought all of the difficulties that they have in the hardware space. Software has largely gone through and solved. How do you go through and do updates? Many of the mature providers today offer security updates on a regular cadence and have a path to do that. Hardware, that's a whole nother set of problems there. Hardware still works like it did 20 years ago. When we're talking about updating your hardware, we're talking about flashing software onto those chipsets. And for most, that is a scary proposition. For IT folks, it's a little bit easier, but certainly if you went and told your mom and dad, hey, I want you to go flash your TPM, this is probably something you don't want to even tell them about because you don't want to do the tech support related to that, walking them through. Infineon went through and did this as a multiple party vulnerability disclosure. And when they went through and did this, they served as what I referred to as sort of a hub and spoke model. All of the parties were engaged on a one-to-one basis. There wasn't a group that came together. It was Infineon talked to one party and they talked to another party, and none of the other parties ever got together or necessarily knew who was being talked to when. What was challenging for this, so the vulnerability disclosure actually worked pretty well. We got we got fixes that went out for that. What was challenging here was really making this understandable and actionable for people, whether that is informed enterprises or the general public. That's what really lacked in this space. Many of the TPMs that are out there today are still vulnerable to this particular issue. You go forward a couple of weeks, and we have the crack attacks that jumped through there. Matthew is up next, so I'm not going to talk about the research there, but this was a great example of multi-party vulnerability disclosure. This brought together the security researcher and a number of industry partners, along with other organizations such as CertCC, ICASI, and the Wi-Fi Alliance. And they all came together to work on a vulnerability and a fix and to get that out the door. This vulnerability disclosure largely worked. It was kept confidentially, was kept within the tent, and it came out at the appointed time, and fixes were largely available for many of the products that were affected there. Like any multi-vulnerability disclosure, it's certainly not perfect. We always talk about tenths. You can keep a secret between a few people, maybe 20 people, but if you start trying to keep a secret within like 100 people or more there, that becomes very problematic for what is actually going to come out. And then it's just a matter of how quickly you can scramble, and that's in nobody's perfect interest. One of the pieces that we still struggle with as a community is how do we do this? What's the trade-off between who's in the tent and who is not in the tent? How do supply chains work in that particular space? And then how do you get the people up to speed who weren't in the tent? Now this is a spot that I've spent a lot of time thinking about because this is a hard problem. You can go and you can create packets and information and make it available, but you start a arms race here where you've got the good guys and the bad guys who all are going to want to go through and do this. So how do you go through and vet who gets the detailed information that gets them up to speed quickly versus handing that off to a bad guy who may be off there using that to attack in the space between times people can get updates out there actually applied. I think when you look at these WPA vulnerabilities, this is a great example of how industry took the challenge and actually was able to work as a community to move that forward. Well, sometimes we look at security through the eyes of privacy. And certainly the Uber breach that happened in late 2017, well, the breach happened several years before, but was disclosed in late 2017, gives us a lens to look at here. Here we found out that Uber had a serious customer breach, and as a result of that, they had gone through to try to keep that quiet, and they paid through a sort of creative method of using their bug bounty program to actually go through and pay $100,000 to security researchers to keep this quiet. Now, I say security researchers, that's probably a real stretch. It was the attacker that came in that just found all this information and then basically held that ransom there. But this, with bug bounties, all our boats rise and fall together here. And when you see security bug bounties being abused in this manner, this is a spot where industry, whether it was security or privacy advocates or heck, even national governments, they came out and painted a very strong line that this was not the way to go through and behave. This was one of the lowlights of the year when you go and take a look at what's going on. When you take attacks and mix that with legitimate security research, that does none of us any particular good as we're looking at this. Well, let's skip forward to the beginning of 2018, if you'll allow me a couple of slides here, and we can talk about Meltdown Inspector. This was a large amount of work that you're seeing here. 4 different security research teams from across the globe went through and discovered what is referred to as the really easy to remember speculative execution side channel attacks. Just sort of rolls off the tongue there. This was a lot of work. It was over 6 months worth of coordination that took to either go and mitigate or find ways to address this. This largely comes down to feature abuse. This was a feature that came in that had been in the chipsets for over a decade and that was in common use there. Feature abuse isn't so new of a concept. Certainly the wide impact of this was most interesting. If you go back again to Configure, auto run was what made Configure be so virulent and actually take off like wildfire back in 2008. Here we had, again, the idea of a multi-party vulnerability disclosure, but this time instead of a hub and spoke model, what you saw was everybody was into a single tent. It was community, it was competitors, it was industry and open source. They were all in together and worked for months as they were going through and trying to describe and decide how to move forward with this. That tent showed its limitations as we went through. As it became necessary, whether it was supply chain, partners, or that, as we got to about a month earlier than the disclosure date that was planned for this, we went through and that expanded the tent, and as the tent expanded, the information leaked, and then so that necessitated 6 days early, the vulnerabilities were published there, just a little bit ahead of what had been the agreed upon schedule for that. Now, speculative execution side channel attacks is a pretty complex set. We're talking low-level chip conversations here. And typically, this is like the equivalent of encryption. Media shouldn't pick this up, right? This is going to be hard to get to an idea that would be understandable for a bunch of common people. Well, in this case, Meltdown Inspector, they really bucked the trend there, and they've got it down so people can understand it. In fact, it even made up into a stick figure drawing in the comic XKCD there, which nicely summarized and made us feel not much better from the idea that you could get this very complex issue down into a single idea. What was difficult in Meltdown Inspector is there was no panacea for customers there. They were looking for, hey, what is the one patch or the one thing I need to go do in order to do it? They got from the media and from the simplification that this was bad and they needed to go through and do it, but they didn't have an idea of what they needed to actually go do, and this was a real struggle that was there. But it wasn't just a struggle for them, it was a struggle for the community and the industry as well. Speculative execution is only, or what was disclosed as part of Meltdown Inspector, was only part of the problem. That initial disclosure was only a small part of what was actually needing to go through and be addressed. Since January, there's been more that's come out in that space, and that's given more of an idea of sort of level of and engagement that's needed throughout the entire ecosystem to address this problem. And then, of course, there were some very painful quality issues with some of the updates that came out in January, and that certainly didn't lead to any goodness that we were seeing around handling Meltdown Inspector there. But there was a lot that was good about the security response that came through with these chipset issues. One, you saw researchers and industry come together. You don't often have a coalition of 4 different geographically dispersed security researchers finding the same issue at a similar time frame. So that was a challenge within itself. But then the number of people who needed to go and take fixes for this was truly an amazing amount of people that you had to move forward on this. There were a couple of new things that came out of how we handled this. One was an industry summit to pool brainpower on this. This is something that hasn't gotten a lot of talk about out in the community, but back in the fall, all of the people that were in the tent, both researchers and industry, came together and they had a summit, brainstormed, continued talking about what each part of the puzzle each member understood, and were able to get a really good understanding of the scope of the issue. That's something that you don't normally see. Normally you have competition pressures that are coming through, and this was a way where we got over those and actually moved forward on a really difficult problem. And then there's, of course, continued engagements on the future research, because chipset problems aren't going away anytime soon. You can guarantee more people are looking at this even today as we're talking. All right, and then there was amdflaws.com. How many people saw this post up there? It was a quick space. I think it was riding right on the coattails there of the Meltdown Inspector set, another chipset issue, small Israeli firm, Winnet. They posted up a website, again, back to the idea, here's my logo, here's my website, and they said, oh, there's something really big and bad that are coming, and you need to be worried about it. But don't worry, we're working with the vendor to try to come up with a solution for it. This sort of tactic isn't new. Go back, Badlock, anybody remember that? They did something similar, and in both cases, this was met with sort of a round condemnation from all sides of the community. What do you end up doing? You're telling me that there's something really bad and scary that's coming, but I have no way to actually go through and do this. Coordinated vulnerability disclosure is nothing new, but how we go through and do this, the CEO of this company came back and said, hey, we need a new way to go and disclose vulnerabilities. I'm not sure we need something new. We just need them not to go and drop things that aren't actionable to customers in a way that's there. So 2017 was certainly a memorable point. It gave us lots of challenges to the way that we were going through and thinking. Happy 2018. Are we ready for what's coming this year? So I mentioned as my current role, I'm going through and I'm looking after what is ecosystem strategy team there at the Microsoft Security Response Center, which is just a real fancy way of saying if it's at all external facing from Microsoft related to security research, I probably have my hand or two in the work that's going on there. One of the things that we learned a long time ago is that we can't affect security really from inside Redmond or the development centers. You can't do security just inside of your castle. You've actually got to go out and engage into the community where people are to actually be able to move what that shared goal is, which is making better protections for the end users that are out there. So what I want to do now is I want to pivot into sort of what is Microsoft doing to try to address some of the challenges that we saw, give you a few examples, and then finish up with, what are the opportunities as a community that we can go through and do and really try to tackle moving forward. So, no surprise, Microsoft has a multi-point strategy going through in different ways that we go through and engage with people. But that all starts with how do you actually get a hold of us? This is an amazingly hard issue for many companies out there. When you talk about multi-party vulnerability disclosure and security researchers who are trying to go through there, or even industry players, it's hard to know where to go into a company. You certainly don't want to go into the support line because odds are they're not going to want to talk to you. So how do you go through and let people know where to report vulnerabilities and how to engage the right teams so you don't end up in a support or sales call there? Then how should they expect you to behave there? Microsoft is a big proponent of coordinated vulnerability disclosure. It's the idea. We want to work with security researchers to actually understand the issues and address them prior to them going out and being public there. I refer back to the idea of that castle and having to go out in the space. There's a couple of different ways. You actually need to go to where the security researchers are. Some of that are conferences like this. We sponsor, we talk, we engage at different conferences. There's over 100 different conferences that I'm tracking throughout the year, and we end up at about 70 different of them. Not all companies are going to be able to have that sort of scale, but there's a lot of work that's going on in this security community, and you need to figure out ways to be in there. But you can also get involved in the conversation through social media. Now, not all of these engagements are going to be the most pleasant. Sometimes we don't do the best things that are out there. Sometimes there are people who aren't being exactly friendly or courteous when we are trying to end up at the same goal that they're going through and doing. But the important piece for us is to actually engage in those conversations, even if we disagree with the particulars there. We also have a bug bounty program. It's not the only thing that you need out there. It worries me some of the conversation in the community goes on. People are looking for a checklist. These new organizations that are showing up, how do you go through and have security response? And they think, oh, I'm going to have a bug bounty program, or I'm just going to post a disclosure policy, and that should be good. It's a security strategy. It's certainly part of a security strategy, but it's not the whole piece, because those are just small pieces and often aren't effective in isolation there. We have, I think, 10 different programs spread over the technologies at Microsoft for different bug bounties that are there. We also contribute back to ISO and international standards. It's important not only to take these lessons, but bring them back in the best practices into the industry. We participate in communities like FIRST and AP CERT and ICASI, and then one that is particularly near to my heart is the Blue Hat Security Conference, which is Microsoft's security conference. It's a mix of external and internal players that come now into two different locations. We have one that's at the main corporate headquarters in Redmond in the US, and then we have one that's in Tel Aviv, Israel, that we go through and do. And that is really about bringing the community together to engage on security topics and how to educate each other on what's going well and what's not going so well. Well, let's look at 4 different things that we're going through to try to tackle this in a little more depth. Becoming accessible is increasingly important, especially with the challenges here. How do you do multi-party vulnerability disclosure? You first need to know how to get a hold of the right people. In addition to going through and publicizing how to get a hold of Microsoft, we're spending a lot of time with FIRST going through creating a standard so that any company can go and put up a contact card in a central location where anybody can look so that you know how to get a hold of those organizations. Because most of the time with multi-party vulnerability disclosure, figuring out who to talk to is the hardest problem. And the smaller the organization, the harder it can get there. We're working on translating our bug bounty and disclosure policies into 7 major languages to match up with how we ship our security documentation today. We're hoping that more language options helps get the information further out into the community there. We're also spending a lot of time, I'd like to tell you not as much, but a lot of time with lawyers going through, working on simplifying legal terms. There's always, when you have a program that's going and you're a large corporation, there's going to be lawyers involved, and you have to figure out how to go through and engage and set up the right rules for folks. And going through and simplifying that is one of the ways we're looking at trying to help researchers engage with us, especially in the cloud when you're looking at how to go research things where you have other customer data that's in play as well. And then we're starting to talk more and document what you can expect from us when a multi-party disclosure occurs. That idea of being very predictable in the community, I think, is going to be an important way forward. We also have a small little bounty program that goes around. One of the ways we did is we actually launched a speculative execution side channel attack bounty. Yes, again, a mouthful that's going there. This represents sort of a experiment with bounties. This is a new class of vulnerabilities that came in, and how do you go through and engage and keep up to date with the research that's going on in the community? So what we offered was 4 different tiers up to $250,000, $250,000 bucks there, looking for a couple of things. One, are there new classes of speculative execution that we're totally unaware of? Can you bypass the mitigations that we actually put into play in the cloud and on Windows? And then were there missed variants on some of our fixes? Different pay scales for those. But it's really an experiment as we're going through and looking at how to engage with the community. $250,000 is a lot of money when you go through and do this. But the impact that you see on those vulnerabilities and how that goes through the industry and the impact of that, it's a big risk and it's something that we want to invest into. The other thing that was really unique about this particular vulnerability bounty program is that it comes with a commitment to share with the industry. We're going to go through, and as we get this, we're working with our partners within the tent around speculative execution to make sure everybody gets the information quickly so that you don't end up having a single vendor with all the information and then a 0-day condition that's going on because of that. We spend a fair amount of our time now at Microsoft in the cloud as well. Some of the things that we've done there, the Cyber Defense Operations Center, we have many silos over the years, different product teams standing up. They all seem to have created their own security operations centers. We brought them all together along with our threat intelligence groups, and they all now sit in the same location, and we're able to go through and collaborate in a fusion center sort of set as a way to try to provide more security within the cloud. We're working together with the big cloud providers, Amazon and Google, on how to better coordinate abuse. It is scary when you go and look at how attackers come through and abuse cloud platforms. They literally move from platform to platform to platform as you're going through and raising the bar. So we've gotten together and tried to find ways that we can go and raise that bar together that makes it just cost prohibitive for abusers to get into the cloud space. And then the last thing in the cloud is we're working on sharing our expertise through workshops and other seminars to try to get people a better understanding of what goes on in the cloud, what's their responsibilities, what is ours, and how they can better work with us when issues arise there. PCERT framework. This is another example of what we're going through. PCERT stands for Product Security Incident Response Teams. This is an initiative by the Forum for Incident Responders and Security Teams. First, there we're going back. Again, I've referenced that some of the players, as they're coming on new here, they don't know where to start. The PCERT framework is a way to go through and give them a heads up and a way to start on doing product security response. There. Microsoft is one of 21 different organizations, from small vendors all the way up to large vendors there where we're going through and contributing back to that standard. Now, despite all of this, there are still big questions that remain that we still don't have a good answer for, and I think as a community we need to come to grips about what we're going to do on some of these. One, with shared components, how do we go and coordinate? How do you figure out who's actually affected and how to get them the information in a secure manner and actually do that in a standard release time frame there? How should industry engage with researchers? I'd like to think that this was relatively settled years and years ago, but I mean, you can still go and see. There are people that are quick to go through and litigate. There's a company litigating a reporter right now based on just reporting on a security vulnerability that was going through. That was generally frowned upon years ago, but it's still happening. How do we go and get to that maturity level that everybody understands how to engage back and forth in the community? Because again, we go through with that shared goal of wanting to make security better. What's the right time to broaden disclosure and multi-party vulnerability disclosure? There's risks every time you do it, but what's that right time frame? And then what about government disclosure? When should you go through and actually give information to the governments related to vulnerabilities that are coming up? So wrapping this up, looking at what we need to do as a community. I think we need to move away from the idea of security as a transactional course of strategy and move into something more viewing it as an investment. We're all in this for the long term. For security researchers and some of the members of industry, we do this out of passion or curiosity. But I'd also say for industry, most businesses are interested in staying in business. And so this is a long-term piece. We can't treat it as little short-term gains that we go through and look at. This has got to be considered as fluid engagement. We've got to change as the challenges come up. You look at last year and all of the things that we've had to absorb and to change process and how we go through and work together. That is going to continue to be something we need to go through and do. We need to realize that humans are the capital and that investing in relationships, whether it's out in the community or virtually over social media, these are important sets. Legal engagement should be the last resort, not one that you should start out with when doing security response. But as I look at sort of this, it's all going back to championing what that customer outcome is. We're in this all together to try to make security better. And if we can remember that, even when we disagree, we can get to collaboration that will get us to that same result. I encourage you guys to give back to the community and to actually participate in the community. There's plenty of spots throughout the world where you can get involved, and that is one of the best ways that I think we're going to be able to move forward in the challenges for this ecosystem. So thank you for your time.